the single most debated character in One Piece in terms of his true strength has always been Mihawk. Mihawk has no impressive feats against any other strong characters, and the only thing we really have to go off is his title as the world's strongest swordsman, as well as the fact that he is Zoro's end goal. Now, for a long time, everything for Mihawk hinged around Shanks. Was Shanks a true swordsman? What does it even mean to be a true swordsman? Is Shanks a quote-unquote hockey man? And all sorts of other vague arguments, with Mihawk fans basically arguing that however strong Shanks is, Mihawk must be stronger than him due to his title. But if that debate wasn't contentious enough, now things just got a lot more complicated, with the reveal that the swordsman of the Gorosei, Zoro, is definitely a strong fighter and a clear endgame opponent, and the leader of the Gods Knights, Saint Figarland, is also a swordsman. And guess what? Like it or not, it is no longer as cut and dry as to whether or not Mihawk is the strongest swordsman alive. You can throw his title out the window, because anyone who has followed the series knows that titles alone are not the end-all be-all. Whitebeard was certainly not the world's strongest man when he had the title, and Kaido was certainly not the world's strongest creature when he had the title. And now that all these powerful swordsmen are emerging in the final saga, it is time to take an objective look at evidence outside the title as to whether or not it makes sense that Mihawk is the actual world's strongest swordsman, or even Zoro's final opponent. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe, and make sure that you actually enjoy your summer by eating good food every day with Factor, the sponsor for this video. If you don't like cooking at all, and I mean like at all, like you don't just want meals that are easy to prepare, you literally don't want to ever have to prepare anything, period, then you need to be using Factor. If you're a lazy kid in college, or you're a very busy adult, then you don't have to keep getting fast food over and over again. Factor delivers delicious, nutritious, fresh meals straight to your door that genuinely taste good, meaning you don't have to waste time grocery shopping or cooking again. Not to mention, Factor is great on a budget. Factor is much less expensive than getting takeout, along with being healthier. In general, Factor's made it way easier for me to manage my work-life balance, since now I know that as soon as I finish a stream late at night, I have something nutritious and delicious ready to eat right away. So go ahead to factor75.com or click the link below and use code MORGE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. That's factor75.com, code MORGE50 to get 50% off. Link in the description below. So that aside, to begin with, the argument that Mihawk has the title of world's strongest swordsman, therefore he must be the strongest, is not a good argument. At least not on its own. That is because it has been made extremely clear that titles are often inaccurate. Literally both other times we've had characters who have held the title of strongest in some way, Whitebeard as the strongest man, and Kaido as the strongest creature, were both proven to be false. If you genuinely believe that just because Mihawk has the title of world's strongest swordsman, then that means he is the strongest swordsman, then you basically have not paid attention to the story at all up till now. The title means one thing and one thing only, that Mihawk has the reputation of being the world's strongest swordsman. That's it. It factually means nothing else. However, hold on before you type your angry comments below. Just because the title alone doesn't mean everything, doesn't mean we don't have additional evidence to suggest that Mihawk is in fact worthy of his title. It all begins with the age-old debate of Mihawk versus Shanks, and yes, we have to retread this very briefly. Now, in the context of this, I'm not going to be getting into the details or speculation of whether or not Shanks has hockey abilities that he would use outside of swordsmanship. I'm just going to be talking about Shanks as a swordsman, meaning using a sword and sword techniques versus Mihawk. If you think Shanks has some other non-sword related stuff up his sleeve, that's fine, but that's not what this is about. Just talking about who is the stronger swordsman. So, Mihawk versus Shanks. The reason this debate is so rampant is because for a long time, the only other top tier swordsman in the series that we had was Shanks. And in this case, Mihawk's title does actually carry a good deal of weight, because it's not just the fact that Mihawk has the title, it's the fact that it is confirmed that Mihawk and Shanks used to duel. The fact that they used to duel, and Mihawk holds the title, whereas Shanks does not, and the world recognizes Mihawk as being superior with the sword, is pretty big. because now it indicates that Mihawk's title is actually based on something. It's not like Kaido, who was just sitting in Wano for 2 years being called the strongest creature for no reason, without Kaido actually ever fighting or proving anything against any of the other contenders. Mihawk did actually duel the only other top tier swordsman in One Piece. Their duels were famous and well known, and Mihawk now has the title of strongest swordsman, whereas Shanks doesn't. So all that is pretty strong evidence that Mihawk must have won the duel, as it makes no sense for Mihawk to have lost the duel but still be given the title. Mihawk does mention settling things with Shanks, which could indicate that the duel was a draw, and that ever since Shanks lost his arm, Mihawk has simply been given the title by default. But even if that is possible, there is one other huge reason that it would simply be wrong for Shanks to be a stronger swordsman than Mihawk. And this is by far the most important reason. The reason that any Mihawk fan should go to when supporting Mihawk as the strongest swordsman. A reason that has nothing to do with titles or reputation, and that reason is simply that the whole strongest swordsman debate is not really about Mihawk or Shanks, it's about Zoro. The entire reason Mihawk even exists, the entire reason the title of World's Strongest Swordsman exists, is because of Zoro. This whole thing was written in for Zoro's dream. Zoro is the character that matters here. He is the second most significant protagonist in One Piece. His dream is the second most emphasized dream in One Piece. His dream is to become the world's strongest swordsman, meaning that the sole purpose of making World's Strongest Swordsman a title that people compete for in One Piece is for Zoro's character journey. In 1,000 chapters, we've literally never even met anyone else who was interested in Strongest Swordsman. This whole shit was made up for Zoro and Zoro alone. Mihawk just exists as the necessary point of achievement for Zoro's journey. As such, Mihawk has to be a stronger swordsman than Shanks, not just in title, but in actuality, because otherwise Zoro's dream is meaningless. If Zoro beat Mihawk, but Shanks was still secretly a stronger swordsman, well then Zoro's entire character journey is a lie, because he would never have actually achieved what he thought he achieved. We also know that Zoro's never going to fight Shanks, so if Shanks is the strongest swordsman, well then Zoro would never get to actually become the strongest swordsman himself. He would just think he's achieved it when he hadn't. It would be like Luffy thinking he found the One Piece, but never actually finding it. So to me, the debate was pretty cut and dry. In a sword fight, Mihawk has to be stronger than Shanks. In a sword fight, Mihawk has to be the strongest in the world. Otherwise, there's no point to Zoro's dream or the goal of World's Strongest Swordsman in the first place. However, all of that now becomes complicated with the addition of 2 new potential swordsman opponents beyond Mihawk, the Gorosei Nusjoro and Saint Figarland. See, as I said, there's no context in which Zoro fighting Shanks would make sense. Therefore, we know that Shanks can't be a stronger swordsman than Mihawk, or else Zoro would never get to achieve his dream of defeating the true strongest swordsman. However, this argument doesn't apply to Nusjoro or Saint Figarland. That's because we know for a fact that the Straw Hats are going to be going to war against the Celestial Dragons by the end of the story. That is the definitive direction that the story is headed. On top of this, it is practically guaranteed that this conflict will be the final conflict of the story. The entirety of the last 800 years has been leading towards this final battle for the dawn of the world, and the defeat of Im and the Celestial Dragons. We pretty much know what the climax of One Piece is, and the climax of One Piece does not involve Zoro fighting Mihawk. Zoro versus Mihawk has to come earlier. So if Zoro fights Mihawk before the final battle against the Celestial Dragons, then naturally this would mean that someone on the Celestial Dragon's side is going to be even stronger than Mihawk, very possibly a stronger swordsman than Mihawk. Because now the Zoro's goal argument no longer applies, as Zoro could in fact defeat Mihawk and realize that there is yet an even greater step that he needs to take, much like in the manner that Luffy could get to Laugh Tale, thereby achieving what he thought was the final step of his dream, only to then find out that there is more work to be done at Marijua before he truly accomplishes his goal. If anything, this route would be far more fitting for Zoro, for the true final goal to be an opponent at Marijua, as first of all, it would be much more powerful narratively for Zoro to achieve his dream of becoming the strongest swordsman in the context of helping resolve the final conflict of the story, in the actual battle for the world itself, rather than in some private, personal duel with Mihawk before the final war even begins. Second, I look back at Zoro's words when he swore to become the world's strongest. Zoro swore to become so strong that even heaven would know his name. That is an extremely interesting phrasing, as the final battle of One Piece is literally about going up to heaven and doing battle with the gods themselves. And now we actually have worthy opponents among the Celestial Dragons. It would be extremely fitting if Zoro's final achievement of truly becoming the strongest swordsman in all existence was in defeating the strongest swordsman in heaven. As such, a lot of signs point to either Gorosei Nusjoro or Saint Figarland being stronger swordsmen than Mihawk. Now, does that make Mihawk a fraud? Not necessarily. To begin with, it's possible that Marijua and its inhabitants are meant to be viewed as separate from the rest of the world. It is supposed to be the land of the gods, or heaven after all. Maybe Oda isn't necessarily lying to us or misleading us when he told us that Mihawk is the world's strongest swordsman, as maybe he really is the world's strongest swordsman, meaning the strongest under the heavens. But there would still be those in the land of the gods above even him. At the same time, maybe we're jumping the gun. Maybe Saint Figarland is very strong, but not necessarily stronger than Mihawk, and not Zoro's final opponent. After all, if Figarland was so strong, then wouldn't he still be king of God Valley, instead of having to be saved by pirates and marines? So in that case, let's say that Gorosei Nusjoro is Zoro's final opponent instead. In this case, Mihawk may still technically not be a fraud, as we know that Nusjoro is not just a swordsman. This Gorosei is a Zoan user as well, and assuming that he is a mythical Zoan, well then that likely comes with a host of special abilities that are clearly beyond swordsmanship. After all, the dragon fruit gives one all sorts of powerful elemental abilities, the phoenix fruit allows for flight, regeneration, flame attacks, and healing, the Buddha fruit allows for powerful shockwaves, and so on. In that vein, maybe Nusjoro is a stronger opponent than Mihawk overall for Zoro, but that would be thanks to a combination of Nusjoro's swordsmanship and some broken devil fruit ability. In this case, Mihawk may still be the true strongest swordsman alive, but Nusjoro may be a stronger fighter overall, giving Zoro an even bigger challenge as a final opponent than Mihawk. And finally, we can't forget the Seraphim. It is still entirely possible that Seraphim Mihawk is ultimately going to be Zoro's final opponent, as the Seraphim are still clearly relevant and still waiting to reach their full potential. In that case, Mihawk is especially not fraudulent, because if Mihawk is stronger than Nusjoro and Figarland, such that at the end of the day, the only worthy opponent left for Zoro in the final war would be the Mihawk Seraphim, essentially an upgraded Mihawk, well then of course that wouldn't be a mark against Mihawk, it would be a testament to his strength. It would mean that only an upgraded version of himself, Mihawk 2.0, could provide a fitting final challenge for Zoro. So all things considered, do you think Mihawk is actually the strongest swordsman alive? And who do you think is Zoro's true final opponent? Saint Figarland, Nusjoro, or Seraphim Mihawk? You all let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe, and you can get my extended thoughts on who I actually think Zoro's final opponent will be on my podcast by supporting me on Patreon. Just hit the link in the description below.